Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Welcome to the Williams County Public Library. I'm Denver Henderson. I'm the programming manager for WCPL. And the summer between my sophomore and junior year in high school, my buddy Ben and I would climb into his brown Chevette with a six-pack of Pepsi and a box of Celeste for Governor literature and drive all over Hocking, Athens, and Meigs County talking to people and shoving leaflets in mailboxes. And if you would have told that high school junior that someday he'd be sitting with Dick Celeste having a conversation, his little head would have exploded. So welcome, Governor, to Brian.
Good.
Welcome back.
It's good to be here, Denver. Thank you very much.
All good things start in libraries, I think we can all agree. So, Governor, what was your first job?
My first job was in the Lakewood Public Library. I lived just up the street, and I became fascinated with the library. They had summer reading competitions, and my challenge was to read more books than my younger sister, who was an enthusiastic reader. So I was hard pressed, and I spent so much time in the library. Finally, they said, you know, you can help us shelve books here, and we'll pay you, which was, you know, for somebody who was 15 or 16 was a pretty good deal.
Yeah.
I was gonna be in the library anyhow, so it was great.
Wonderful. Yeah. Libraries are central to our communities today, and thank you for being here. All good stories start with grandmothers. I'm convinced of this. So let's start, as the book does, start with the advice from your grandmother. Could you please explain?
Which grandmother?
Dickie, breast of your cards.
So my father was born in Italy. He was 9 months old when his mother brought him to Menneson, Pennsylvania, where he grew up and went to high school. And he came to Ohio to the College of Worcester, married my mom. We lived in Lakewood, Ohio. But about once or twice a year, we'd drive back to Menneson, Pennsylvania, before turnpikes. It was great fun. And he would never tell Nana that we were coming because he didn't want her to make a fuss. Of course, all she did was make more of a fuss because, you know, you didn't tell me, and now I have to cook it. So she would put a meal together, and after the meal was over, generally around 9 o'clock, and mind you, in Menneson, Pennsylvania, it never got dark because this is when the steel mills were booming, and it was open hearth furnaces, and so it was like an inferno not far from the house, lighting everything. So we would play a card game she loved called Scupa, and she was very competitive, but her lesson to me always was, Dickie, bless the cards. Don't let anyone see the cards you have, right? So I probably genetically had a little bit of the Calabrian stubbornness and impulse towards secrecy anyhow, but she reinforced that with the idea that always kind of keep something back. It served me pretty well in politics from time to time, let me say.
And the advice of the other grandmother.
So my other grandmother was a complete contrast. Bessie Lewis, my mother's mother, her family, she was a Salisbury by birth and a Lewis by marriage. Her father had fought in the Civil War. I have some of his cutlery from the Civil War days. She loved to travel. Born in 1875, in 1893, 18 years old, she goes by train from Cleveland to Seattle by herself to see her older brother who was on his way to Alaska to find gold. He never found enough gold to become rich, but he found just enough gold to stay in Alaska. So she went back 2 or 3 times. One of the things she did was fly across the Gulf of Mexico in a dirigible. And for my graduation from junior high school, she got me a ticket on a Greyhound. We went by Greyhound bus. I still have the ticket. We went to Washington, D.C., and she walked me all over our nation's capital. and told me how important public service was. Every citizen has a responsibility. And her repeated advice to me was the biblical adage, to whom much is given, much is expected. That you've been given a lot, you have a big responsibility. And she would remind me of that quite frequently, Denver. Sometimes more frequently than I wanted.
And of course, you're a native Ohioan, born and raised in Lakewood. Went off to Yale, and in 1963, you found yourself in India with someone I consider one of the fascinating diplomatic and political figures of the post-war era, Chester Bowles.
Yep.
And so how did he influence your thinking of public life, and what lessons did he teach you? You've referred to him as your mentor.
Well, first place, I didn't meet him. The way I met him was really interesting because I was active in the Methodist student movement as a high school and college, and I became president of the Methodist student movement my senior year in college. I was asked by the staff to testify against the draft. 1958, we still had a draft. So I went to Washington, and Congressional Committee, big deal, I'm going to testify against the draft. Of course, if you watch C-SPAN, it's the same today. There's almost never a member of Congress. There'll probably be one or two there, right? And you're testifying mostly to an empty room. Anyway, so I testified. I'm leaving, and a woman came up to me and introduced herself. My name is Steb Bowles. You need to meet my husband. He has a vote on this legislation. And I'd like you to meet my son too. He's a junior at Yale. So I met her husband, but more importantly, I met her son, who became a very good friend because I stayed in New Haven for another year, and we stirred things up there for a year. Then I went off to England for a couple years, came back, and Sam's sister was working at the Peace Corps. This is now December 1962. John Kennedy's president. Sarge Shriver's building the Peace Corps, getting it started for the president. And Sally Bowles was there. She called me and said, come down here, we need people down here. She basically said, we need bodies. We're trying to create this thing. Come help us. So I went down for an interview. By this time I was married. And we had learned, I'd gotten married in Europe, we had learned that we were pregnant. So I got to the Peace Corps for an interview and discovered that they would hire almost anyone who, was on 2 feet and could present reasonably well. But more importantly, that the health insurance that the federal government offered in 1982 did not treat pregnancy as a pre-existing condition, because private insurance at that time, some of you may remember, you may have had this experience, pregnancy was considered a pre-existing condition. So all of a sudden, we had no insurance, but if I went to work for the Peace Corps, I didn't have insurance. So I went to work, was there for 3 or 4 months, and Chester Bowles, Sally's dad, asked me to come over for lunch at the State Department. President Kennedy had asked him to become ambassador to India. He'd served there once before. And I was 25. I went home to my wife and I said, she said, what did he want? I said, well, he asked me to go to India as a staff assistant. She said, well, what did you say? I said, I had to think about it. I wanted to talk to you. She said, what are you worried about? I moved from Europe to New Haven, from New Haven to Washington. So Washington to New Delhi, what difference does it make to me, right? So that was how I ended up in India. And I thought I'd be there for 2 years, but I stayed 4. And Ambassador Bowles took a keen interest in young people and trying to expose them to experience beyond just the day-to-day. So every time we had a politician come to Washington, to New Delhi, I was the control officer. When Hubert Humphrey came, I was the control officer. When Arthur Goldberg, who at that time was a Supreme Court justice, I was the control officer. When we had a congressional delegation, which included the then senior Ohio Senator Frank Lausche, I was the control officer. So I had a chance to interact with all these people. And then Richard Nixon came, and I was his control officer. And interestingly, we spent 4 days, I put the schedule together for him, took him around. This is 1967. He's trying to get back into circulation so he can run for president in 1968. At the end of the 4 days, he was getting ready to go to the airport, and he said, Dick, I want to thank you for helping me get around and providing me background on my visits with government officials and the rest. He said, I'd like to encourage you to think about life in public service. I can tell you, sometimes it can be hard, but it is very fulfilling. He said, I think you might not be my party, but I'd still encourage you, right? And later when he got home, he sent me a thank you letter for the work in which he encouraged me again to think about running for office. That letter appeared in my literature 2 years later when I'm running for state representative and he's president of the United States. My Republican opponent was very dismayed that I had a letter that encouraged me to get involved in politics from the Republican president of the United States.
Well, that was one of the best things Dick Nixon ever did. So you spent your time in India, and then you came back home, and of course, as you said, you ran for state rep and lieutenant governor. There are two wonderful things I'd like you to talk about. What is a willaloo, and what are commando tactics?
The guerrilla tactics.
Guerrilla tactics.
Guerrilla
Tactics.
Let me start with guerrilla tactics. The idea of guerrilla tactics is to do things that are outside the box, that aren't in the kind of necessarily the political rule book normally, right? So the first thing we did was in my first state rep campaign. Some of you may remember there was a time when the beginning, the preseason for football, the Cleveland Browns would have a doubleheader at the Cleveland Stadium, and they'd fill it up for 2 football games, 2 other teams, and then the Browns versus someone, and it was always a huge deal, right? So I went to the doubleheader, the 103,000 people jamming the old Cleveland Municipal Stadium, and my brother had me paged during the game. Is Richard Celeste, we need Richard Celeste to come to, Richard Celeste, would you please come to a phone? Richard Celeste, right? We knew my opponent was there with his Rotary Club. And so they're all saying to him, George, what are you going to do now? Who's going to page you? How are you going to do? Just get under the skin, right? And there were I'll give you one other example that's later sort of in the sequence of things. As you remember, as lieutenant governor, I ran, I'll give you an example from the lieutenant governor's race. I wanted to impress Governor Gilligan. I wanted his endorsement because it was going to be a big, complicated primary, 1974. And so I wanted to impress him with my organization. So we took a Saturday early in the spring, and we had volunteers canvass his precinct with literature and the precincts of each of the political reporters for the major dailies. So the political reporter for the Toledo Blade, the political reporter for the Dayton Daily News, the political reporter for the Akron Beacon Journal, they all get Celeste literature the same day. Well, there's Celeste organizations everywhere. We canvassed 12 precincts in the state, but it seemed like we were canvassing 12,000, right? And Jack Gilligan was impressed by our campaign organization. Guerrilla tactics were thinking out of the box to do things in a way that was different. The Willaloo, one of the things people ask, how do you be, what accounts for your success in politics? I believed that I needed, in that first statewide race, I was running for lieutenant governor, I needed the support of the governor and his organization. I needed the support of the state Democratic Party, and then I needed my own team. And I believed that every county was important. And so I was going to go to every county. I was going to visit every county during the summer, which I did. I went to every county fair in the state of Ohio in the course of that campaign. And I would have a Celeste coordinator in every county. So there was a Celeste coordinator in Williams County, there was a Celeste coordinator in Putnam County, there was a Celeste coordinator in Lucas County. We had regional desk people sat at our headquarters in Columbus, and we'd have 12 or 14 counties that they would check in with. And we did a vote budget for every county. And the purpose of the vote budget wasn't that we were going to win every county, but we wanted to improve on the Democratic margin that was typical. So we would give the coordinator, let's say for Williams County, a vote budget in which the idea was get 3% or 4% more than a typical Democratic turnout. That's what we hope that you can do, right? And if there was an event or a way in which I could plug into this, well, this meant that we had a core organization of probably 30 individuals. Many of them were couples, young husbands and wives who got excited about politics and were supportive, usually friends of my brother's, frankly. Some of them know my brother. And we would get together, and the theme in that first statewide campaign, well, it became a theme in the state rep race, but particularly in the lieutenant governor's race, was, and we made a t-shirt out of it, are we having fun yet? Because our rule was if you weren't having fun in the campaign, something was not right with the campaign. Well, after, starting the setup for the lieutenant governor's race was a meeting with the first 20 or 25 core people in the Celeste organization. Some of them had worked in the McGovern campaign in 1972. Some of them had worked on my state rep races, but we got together at Salt Fork State Park, and we called it a Willaloo, which was a made-up term for a gathering of friends and family, right? And we spent one day talking about politics, and then we spent another day playing touch football, making pancakes, cooking food, people brought food, and we just had a good time. And from that time, every year from 1970, we started in 73, from 1973 until 1991 when I left office, every year we would have a Willaloo in a different state park. And we would come together, and usually we had to tip off the park authorities because we could get kind of raucous. And in fact, one time we got so raucous, I don't think I put this in the book, but we got so raucous, I crawled out the bathroom window of a cabin we were in because I didn't want to, somebody had come and started knocking on the door. I didn't want the governor to be caught with a raucous charades game, I think is what we were playing, but we were probably playing charades with some beer and wine as well. So anyway,
Would have been
that's a Willaloo.
charade gate in the making. You are the last lieutenant governor to be elected on a separate ticket from governor. And you found yourself, not as you'd wish with Governor Gilligan, but with Governor Rhodes.
Yep.
What was that job like?
Well, I went to see him after the election. I was astonished. Jack lost the election by 11,000 votes out of 3.2 million. Less than one vote per precinct in the state. I won with 90,000 votes, so I was surprised. So I went to call on Rhodes, if this is before we had been sworn in. I called him. He was in the office in Levesque Tower in Columbus. Governor, I want to, congratulate you. I guess the people of Ohio wanted you and they wanted me. I'm surprised. He said, kind of nodded. I said, but if the people of Ohio elected you and they elected me, I figure, we should do whatever we can together. So I want to be helpful in any way I can. Do you play golf? He said. No, I don't play golf. Well, you should take it up, he said. Why should I take up golf? He said, because I'm not going to give you a damn thing to do. And that was Jim Rhodes. So, I presided in the Senate, and I was pretty good at it, and enjoyed it. But I also spent a lot of time campaigning for governor. I figured, since he didn't have much to do. And we came close in '78. But Rhodes was a wily guy. He knew the state. He had a lot of friends around the state. And I didn't run my best campaign. So I lost by 23,000 votes, I think, at that time.
But as you state in the book, you came to respect the Governor Rhodes.
Yeah, over time, we got to know each other pretty well. I mean, he was totally different from me. I mean, he had a high school education. He's done one semester at Ohio State. He had, we call him street smarts, but I mean, intuitively, he loved the state of Ohio, and he loved people in the state of Ohio. I didn't agree with a lot of things I fought him on the bond issues in 1975 and beat him and the rest, but he respected, I think he came to respect me because he realized I loved the state of Ohio as much as he did. I enjoyed being governor as much as he did. And, we had boxes at the Ohio State football game. They changed the stadium now. The former governor and the governor were side by side so we could talk during halftime of the Ohio State games. First time, I don't think this is in the book either, but here's another. So I'm governor, he's the former governor, it's let's say 1983 maybe. He says, look out for Woody Hayes. I said, what do you mean look out for Woody Hayes? And Woody's going to come after you, he's going to want you to do something, and just look out, because he'll ask you for anything. He said, let me give you an example. One night, Woody woke me up 3 a.m. Phone rings. It's Woody. Woody, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. I know, Governor, I need you to drive with me to Pittsburgh. Woody, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. I need you to drive with me to Pittsburgh. Come on. Just put some pants over your pajamas and come with me, Governor. Come on. I'll be there in 15 minutes. And Rhodes said, I didn't know how to say no to Woody. So I'm in a car, we drive to Pittsburgh. We arrive in Pittsburgh, we go to night court. We're in night court. We're both sitting there. And finally, the judge says, is there anyone here on behalf of Bob Ferguson? And Bob Ferguson had been a great player for Woody. Woody said, Your Honor, yes, I'm here. And he walked up toward the bench and said, I'd like to speak to you, Your Honor. My name is Woody Hayes. I was his coach when he was in college and played football for me. I know he's had some problems. He had a drunken disorderly, he got in a fight at a bar in Pittsburgh. Judge, I'd like you to release him to me so I can take him back to Ohio. Look, he hit a guy. I understand he's had some prior convictions. He's going to have to spend some time in jail. Your Honor, I want to just ask you if you could make an exception. I'd like to take him back to Ohio. He's starting a job with the state of Ohio on Monday. And the judge said, starting a job with the state of Ohio on Monday, how do you know? Your Honor, see that fellow sitting back there? That's the governor of Ohio. The judge says, sir, would you stand up and identify yourself? Rhodes said. I stood up and I said, Your Honor, yeah, my name is Jim Rhodes. I'm the governor of Ohio. Is it true that this fellow has a job with the state of Ohio on Monday morning? Rhodes said, what can I say? I said, yes, Your Honor, he does. He said, look out for Woody Hayes.
Wow. That's a wonderful story.
Isn't that a good story?
That's a good story. Your first administration, you were handed record unemployment. You were handed a $500 million deficit. You were an untested administration. Walk us through that first 2 months. It must have been
Well, yeah, I mean,
a trial by fire.
it was a challenge. We knew that we had high unemployment. I mean, the whole theme of the campaign in '82 was to get Ohio back to work. And if we don't stand up for Ohio, who will? Some of you remember this song, do you care enough to care about Ohio, right? And we can do together the things that we can't do alone. So focusing on job generation was a key. And we knew there was a problem. Jim Rhodes had raised a temporary tax, he called it a temporary tax. We didn't know how bad it was until we got into a transition. And to his credit, Howard Collier, who was Rhodes' finance director, was very honest. He said, well, you've got a $483 million deficit. States aren't like the federal government. You can't deficit finance. We had to balance the budget by June 30th. So we ended up making tough decisions on taxes, which I didn't communicate very well, unfortunately. That was one of the mistakes I described in the book, of things where I could have done better. But we did some good things. At that time, I had campaigned against the Honda deal. Rhodes had promised Honda a lot of money to build a manufacturing plant in Ohio. They had a motorcycle plant. And we had Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, they're all in Ohio, right? And why are we going to give Honda something? We got our own people. And I was close to UAW. So as soon as I got elected, the Honda folks came to me and said, Governor, we have this commitment, are you going to honor it? Rhodes had said, well, I've got $35 million that's been incentive for you, or something like that. I said, well, here's the situation. We have a deficit. I can't promise you all that money. You tell me what you want to do for Ohio, and then I'll make a decision. They said, well, if we do this, we will build this plant in 18 months and we will employ 2,000 people. And I said, well, if you'll make that commitment, here's what we can do. We can extend a railroad stub out to your plant. We can widen the highway next to the plant in Marysville, and we can give you some job training money. It's not $35 million, but that's what we can do. And to their credit, Honda, they got going. 18 months later, that factory was open. Mr. Honda came by on his own. He was in his 80s. He stood there and shook hands of every person who had been hired for the plant. They hired almost 2,000 people. Before my 8 years were up, Honda had built 3 more plants in Ohio. Transmission plant, engine plant, and a second assembly plant. 10,000 employees in Ohio, plus about 30,000 suppliers who had moved here. In fact, the year after they opened the plant, Mr. Honda invited me to bring a trade mission to Japan, and he called 60 suppliers together. And he said, I want you near my plant in Marysville. And, Asai Glass, or these folks they got the word, and they came to Ohio. So, I mean, there were decisions that we had to make. They weren't all easy, but it was, when you're governor, you make decisions. That's what you have to do.
You've had 6 statewide elections, and they were all pretty competitive.
Yep.
Unfortunately, our state is under the curse of gerrymandering right now. There are very few truly competitive elections, and voter suppression and drop boxes, 1 per county, is being proposed. How do we get our voices heard here at the local level?
Yeah. Well, the first place, I think local government is still a place where democracy works. And I think you see it probably in communities across the state. There are places where, in first place, the partisan divisions are probably not as extreme as they are in the gerrymandered legislative districts. And, you know, people, you know everybody. You know, my dad was mayor of our hometown. He couldn't go to a grocery store, and somebody would say, you know, the street light's out in front of my house, Frank, what are you going to do about it, right? And so local government has that. Some of you have been involved. You know what it's like. People know each other, right? I think the arrogance of what's happening in Columbus today is so extreme, and it doesn't have to do with party. I mean, a lot of folks belong to one party, but the idea, for example, that we're going to do a good government act and we're going to get rid of special elections in August, and we're going to save taxpayers money because it's an expensive thing to run and the turnout is low. We should hold elections when people expect elections in November. So you pass that legislation, and now you turn around and say, okay, oops, we need a special election this year, so we can just do one thing, and that is to increase the number of signatures you need in order to have the people's voice heard on a constitutional issue, which is outrageous, right? And I think, personally, I believe the people of Ohio are going to say enough is enough on this. When you have 4 former governors, 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats say this is a bad idea. Bob Taft wrote a very thoughtful letter to the legislature pointing out the problems that raising the signature requirement to 60% of it will prevent virtually any amendment of the Constitution unless some money bags comes in with so much money they can flood the state and try to professionalize the gathering of signatures and so on. I think it's outrageous. I said at the Metropolitan Club, you heard that speech, somebody asked me about it. I said, look, if they really believe that a constitutional amendment requires 60% of the register, then they should put language in the thing they're putting on the ballot this August that says this will only become effective if 60% of the people approve it. But the hypocrisy's pretty obvious. Now, what do we do about it? Hopefully, within a year, by next year, when we have a presidential election and a lot of people come out to vote, we'll have an issue on the ballot to redo how we draw fair districts. And instead of using a plan that puts it in the hands of politicians, and we saw what they did, I mean, 3 or 4 plans that got rejected until, you know, there was no time to do something different. I think something like the Michigan plan where they have citizens and a fair basis for drawing it. In Colorado, we have a similar plan. I mean, there are many models that could be used. But if we could eliminate gerrymandering of state legislature and congressional districts, then we encourage folks who speak to the middle, which is where most people are. So I pointed out, many people don't realize this, there are more registered Democrats than registered Republicans in Ohio today. Did you know that? If you look at the Secretary of State's website, 937,000, this is the last numbers, it's 2021, but 937,000 registered Democrats, 820,000 registered Republicans, 6.2 million unaffiliated voters, 6.2 million independent voters. Now, you know, some will tend to vote Republican, will tend to vote Democrat, but they are persuadable. And if we had legislative and congressional districts that encouraged you to speak to the persuadable voter, I think we'd get a much healthier conversation going. It might even bring civility back into the public arena. Wouldn't that be nice?
That would be very nice.
anyhow, and the other thing I think would be really valuable is, I think the idea, Citizen United, the idea was that corporations are people, number one, and that you didn't really have to put your name on a contribution. The latter thing, it seems to me, is really dangerous, and so I believe that another major step forward would be to say, maybe we can't limit what people can give, but we can make sure that they put their name on it, so we know who's putting $10,000 or who's raised $100,000 into some special PAC or whatever it is. Everything has a name on it, and I think that would improve things.
I also propose that they come live in a small town where you have to.
I love small towns.
Yes.
Can I tell a small town story?
You can tell whatever you want, sir.
So people wonder. I'm from Cleveland. I need to get around the state. I'm deciding I want to learn more about the state of Ohio, so I travel around and I'm having a great time. And I came to Northwest Ohio. I wanted to spend some time with farmers, and I think Charlie Nash set me up with a young farmer someplace. But anyway, I'm going around the farm. He's taking me around. There's a television station from Toledo following us around. At one point, he says, "I want to show you the calf my daughter's going to enter into the county fair." And he could see me, I thought about asking the question, but there's a television camera on, so I didn't know. I decided not to ask the question that was on my mind. We finished the tour. TV heads back to Toledo. This fellow turns to me, he said, you were going to ask me a question. What was the question? I was going to ask you, what's the name of your daughter's calf? He said, "Oh, Dick, never name a calf you're going to eat." I thought, boy, am I glad I didn't ask the question, right? But it's good. It's actually good advice. Never name a calf you're going to eat, right? I had so much fun. I was in a small county in South. Well, not far from where you were spending time in Athens. The county chair. We had coffee at the coffee shop, and as we were leaving, he said, "Dick, you should, if you have a few minutes, come on over to my office." He was a lawyer. My secretary is really the key to the Democratic Party here. She knows everyone, so I want to introduce you. I said, "Great." He said, "Do you mind if I stop for an errand?" I said, "No." So he goes over to a car, opens the door, buzzer goes off, and the keys are obviously in the car. Takes a camera off the seat. I remember this is 1973. Unrolls the film from the camera, walks into the drugstore to get the film developed, comes back, drops the camera on the car seat, closes the door as the buzzer's going off. I said, "You leave your keys in the car?" Camera on the front seat. He said, "There's only one person in town who steals cars, and we all know who he is." That's pretty funny. So we continue across the square. There's a Rolls Royce sitting there. I said, "Who has a Rolls Royce in town?" Now, there's a big class action attorney. He got a black lung settlement, and the first thing he did was buy himself a Rolls. I said, "Do you think he leaves the keys in the car?" He said, "Sure, he leaves the keys in the car." So fast forward 3 months. I'm now Lieutenant Governor of Ohio. Dora Globe puts a call through. She says, "Chairman wants to talk to you." It was this county chairman. He said, "Dick, I'm just calling because I thought you'd like to know that the Rolls got stolen today." I said, "Really? Did they find it?" "Yeah," he said, "it was in the driveway of the guy who steals cars." What? If you can't love getting around the state and having experiences like this, I don't think you belong in politics, really. And I think that's part of what we've lost today. Everybody's using cell phones and laptops, and this is how we're going to communicate. And we got social media and cable TV or whatever it is. Get into people's, front porches, backyards, walk the farm with them, find out who's the guy who steals cars in town, whatever it might be, right? a lot of you have been involved in politics. That's really when it works, I think. So anyhow.
And buy a frog in Vinton County.
Oof. I got a text from a guy in Colorado Springs. He's reading the book today. He's originally from Ohio. He said, I just read about the Vinton County Fair. So I'm going to every fair. Vinton County, the smallest, least populous county in Ohio, does not have a regular fair. They have a junior fair. The junior fair has only one kind of grandstand. It can seat maybe 120 people. So I'm with the county chairman. We go to the junior county fair, and it's right in the middle where we arrive just as the frog jumping competition is starting. Now I had been told, because I was going to all these fairs, never bid on an animal at the fair, because one way or another, you know, one kid will be satisfied and 8 families will be upset because, you know. So I stayed away from bidding, but the champion frog went for like $2. I figured, you know, I'm gonna bid on a frog. So I started bidding on the runner-up frog. $2, $3, $4, $5, $8, $10. County chairman gives me, get the hell out of here. What happened? He said, somebody recognized you. I said, let me take care of this. So the runner-up frog cost me $18. And I knew the tradition, you give the animal back to the kid who raised it. So I figured this kid would like his frog. So I said, here's your frog. It's some kind of frog, $18. He said, nah, I don't want the frog. I said, what do you mean? He said, it's not really my frog. I just picked it up at the creek on the way in. And quite an impression.
I'll put hand to heart to say that one of my dearest high school friends married the junior fair queen of Vinton County
in
1989.
There you go.
they were high school sweethearts. So, your administration and you, even from being governor to being ambassador to being a college president, you've always advocated for young people. You've always included young people. Unfortunately, within like the last 10 to 15 years, it seems to be this trend of trying to disenfranchise young people, to talk down to them, and thwarting them almost, you know. They talk about avocado toast and being too woke, and how can we recapture the spirit of bringing them on board and getting them active?
Well, I mean, I think any really good politician shouldn't be afraid of young people, but should embrace them. And I think that young people represent the fear that's driving some in the country to do things like ban books and do these other things, because young people see the world differently today. I mean, they understand that they're going to have to live with the climate that we're creating or that we aren't protecting, right? They're going to have to live with water problems that are going to grow less in Ohio. Ohio's got a great water resource, which would be terrific, but in Colorado, that's a keen issue, and young people understand that. Young people recognize that the world is getting more and more diverse, and they grow comfortable with it. That's where actually I think online stuff can be helpful, because they engage with way beyond whatever their little friend circle is when they're, you know, my son started playing, I don't know, one of the games that he was in. He was part of a multiplayer game where he had friends playing with him who were in Australia or in Canada or wherever it was, right? I think and young people will make their voices heard. I mean, some of you probably saw this information, but there was this very important election in Wisconsin for the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And the Democratic candidate was a pro-choice candidate, and the Republican candidate was a MAGA Republican. And Wisconsin's a place where the margins tend to be 1 or 2%. The Democratic candidate was elected with 58% of the vote, an 11-point margin over the Republican candidate. when you looked at the data, the University of Wisconsin in Madison, those precincts voted 248% more than in the presidential election. And in the University of Wisconsin, Janesville, which is in the hinterland, there, those precincts voted 280% more than in the presidential election. So that was a special election, and you get a turnout that is that much bigger than in the presidential year. It's stunning. And this is young people saying, we want our voice to be heard, and we're going to insist on it. And it's one reason why I think, Frank LaRose is taking drop boxes away, right? I mean, making voting harder. My home county in Colorado now, where I live most of the time, and where I vote, although I probably should come back and establish residence in Ohio so I can help in a resurgent here. But our county has 39 drop boxes for a county whose population is less than the population of Cuyahoga County, Cleveland. And Cleveland's going to have one drop box if the way they do it. I mean, that's crazy. I can walk from my house and drop my ballot in the drop box. It's about a mile from my house. It's in the community garden where people go and do their gardening. It's safe. They have a camera on it. It's got security. They clean it out every night, make sure that it's safe. I mean, it's crazy. It is crazy. Colorado decide they want you to vote, right? Mm-hmm. I get my ballot in the mail. I fill it in, I sign it, seal the envelope, sign the back of it, drop it in the drop box. I get an email that tells me it has been received, confirming it has been received. And then later, I get an email that tells me it's been tabulated. So I know exactly what's happened to my ballot.
Well, if you want to re-establish in Ohio, may I suggest Bryan? It's a wonderful little town.
There you go. Maybe questions for
Yes,
some of these.
I was just about ready to say, would anybody in the audience like to ask the governor a question? I think I've talked enough.
Yep.
Just got a question. Were you elected as governor relatively young, like in your 40s?
I was, 82, I was 45. I was 44, 45 right after. I turned, I think, can't remember whether the first Tuesday after the first Monday was that early that November, but it was right around the same time. My birthday's the 11th of November, so it may have been right after the election. Yeah. I was fortunate.
In the back. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
When you ran for governor in '82,
Yeah.
you were in a Democrat primary with two other candidates.
Yes. Bill Brown and Jerry Springer.
And a lot of people were backing Billy Joe Brown. How
Yeah.
did you pull that election off of winning that primary?
Every election where I had a primary, I had to run against a Brown. In the lieutenant governor primary, there was a fellow named Jim Brown from Steubenville. It's a good name. Jim Brown was a great football player, and a lot of people, he thought he had traction, but I don't know, Bill. There were several things. I liked Bill Brown a lot, but he had not campaigned in the big urban counties a lot. He relied on the name, and his name was good, and he did a terrific job. He was an excellent attorney general. I don't know. His widow was at the Metropolitan Club when I spoke in Columbus. She told me that Bill really appreciated our relationship because I I stayed in touch with him after I beat him, and we did some things together. He helped me solve a very important problem. You'll remember one of the things that we did when I became governor was to pass the state employee, the collective bargaining act for state employees, right? And we had 90 days in which to write the regulations that would govern how we manage the recognition of unions and manage this. And I hired a guy on the advice of a dear friend of mine, Martin Hughes, of Communication Workers. I hired a guy who was a professor of labor law from Cleveland State University. His name was Ted Dyke. And I told him when I hired him, look, you've got to get this thing done in 90 days. We've got to have the regulations there, because if there's a strike, God forbid, we don't have regulations, we're going to be in the soup and we'll undermine them. Long and short is, he didn't get it done. Finally, I got so upset with it, I called him in about 60 days in and told him I needed his resignation. I'm not gonna resign. You asked me to do this job, I'm gonna do this job. I said, Ted, you've had 60 days to do the job. There's no evidence that you've got this done. I have no confidence in you. I want your resignation. I'm not gonna resign. He said, well, you know, I can make you leave for misfeasance, malfeasance, or non-feasance, right? No, I'm going to do this job. He left the office. I asked Larry McCartney, who was my personnel guy, I said, Larry, would you get Bill Brown on the phone for me? I called Bill Brown. I said, Bill, I have a job I need your help with. I explained the situation. I said, this guy needs to hear the whisper of the guillotine, right? He has to understand that he doesn't really have a choice in this matter. Bill said, I love this assignment. He said, Governor, give me a couple hours, right? He called me back 2 hours later. He said, listen, you're going to have his resignation letter on your desk at 9 o'clock in the morning. It was, you know, and then we got a wonderful former judge who was named Jack Day. He actually served on the Court of Appeals, or maybe the Supreme Court, but a labor lawyer by training, and in 30 days he got the job done. But Bill Brown was terrific. I just beat him. That was all. I beat Jerry Springer too, who had a lot of money. Jerry saw me in the airport in Chicago 5 or 6 years after I had left office. And he said, I just want to thank you. I said, thank me for what? He said, well, you got me out of politics. I have made so much money. This television show. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
Kind of a fun fact question. I wondered, what was your favorite food you found at the county fairs?
What was my favorite food?
Yeah.
Oh boy, that is such a good question. I was a sucker for cakes and pies, and so I would, you know, whoever was at the stand at the time, I'd say, what is your favorite cake or pie? And then I'd get it, thinking that I would only have one piece and I'd give the rest to my staff. I generally had 2 or 3 pieces wherever I went. It was very bad for my diet, but I loved it.
So that's what you go to the fair for?
Yeah, no, it was, I had so much fun. For the state fair, I moved my office to the fairgrounds for all 16 days of the fair.
Nice.
And we just had a fabulous time.
I have another question.
Yep.
You said your one grandmother was from Italy, and then your other grandmother, her main name was Salisbury?
Yeah, well, my name was Salisbury. She married a fellow named Lewis. She grew up in Berea, Ohio, and you know, she didn't have a college education. She had a high school education. Then she taught. We have teachers here. Taught in a one-room school, and it was during the summer that she got on the train and went up to Alaska.
Was her family from Germany?
Her husband's family was from Alsace-Lorraine. Her family was originally from England. Salisbury's were from England. But I don't know, I've never really gotten all the way back with her family. I mean, I do know that her father, interestingly, because I'm now in Colorado Springs, her father fought in the Civil War, They had a very small farm in Berea, Ohio. Fought in the Civil War, came home, and wanted to think about moving the family west. So on his own, he went out as far as Colorado Springs. And literally, probably not far from where I'm living today, decided Ohio's better than this. And so he came back to Ohio, and his family stayed in Berea. That's where they raised him.
Thank you, Bruce.
Yeah. It's great to, it's great.
I've always wondered, what was the impetus for the Capital for a Day program?
Well,
You said you moved your office to the State Fair.
Yeah.
I loved that program.
well, Capital, there was, I think, maybe Dick Lamb. There was a governor who did that. He did Capital for a Day 2 or 3 times, right? And I decided, Ohio is such a wonderful city with not just big cities, but small towns that would be great to host it. And so we started doing it, probably 6 times a year, something like that. And the beauty of it is that we learned as much as, it was partly to be able to talk to people about what we were doing, but we learned as much in the process. And all my cabinet would be there, and we'd get 80 or 100 people who come to a town meeting basically to ask the governor questions in the cabinet. And, when there were highway problems, the director of transportation was there. He said, why hasn't this highway been fixed? Or, the money was appropriated for widening the bridge, but the bridge hasn't been widened. What's going on? And that kind of conversation, I think, reminded people in Columbus that, the real action isn't in Columbus. The real action is out across the state.
It made us feel like government was actually immediate to in our lives.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Given the state of our gerrymandered state and the lack of voter participation, what can we do to increase people coming out to vote, especially in primaries? I feel if we had more people vote in the primaries, we wouldn't have the radicals from both parties controlling things.
Yeah, I think part of it is thinking in terms of how do we organize at the local level and engage folks. I think the candidates have a responsibility, right? Part of it is encouraging. My feeling is fresh young candidates, they don't know enough to be discouraged, right? I didn't know enough to be discouraged. I was going to go on. I ran in a district, had never elected a Democrat before, and was successful. All of my volunteers were junior high students. I mean, I had a dozen or so adults, but I had 20 junior high students who would canvass every Saturday with me, and we knocked on every door in the district. And that's, that was kind of what made a difference, I think, in terms of, and, the interesting thing is, if you can get young kids excited about a candidate, their parents get excited. They begin to get involved. One of the things I saw, I'm sitting as a president of Colorado College, almost all my trustees were Republicans, right? Obama is running for president, and I had 3 of those trustees come up to me and say, Dick, kind of a little bit ashamed, we voted for Obama. Really? Yeah. Why'd you vote for Obama? My granddaughter made me do it. My son made me do it. Right? And so I think the more that we can engage young people, and they have reasons to care. I mean, the climate issue is an issue that they are very serious about. They're very serious about, they're very serious about being deprived of their vote. I mean, I believe that this effort to put the issue on the ballot in August is going to burn the fingers of people who put it on the ballot. And I think the more we can tell that story when they come around to run in the next election, a year and a half from now, we can go at them hard that way. We get young, enthusiastic candidates who will surprise them. Or maybe get an 87-year-old run for governor.
Well, Move back to Ohio.
I own a condo in Cleveland. I mean, I could re-register. And then that'd make the president look young. Right? He'd be just a kid.
You still have plenty of name recognition.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Yeah. Well, I appreciate, and let me just say, Denver, to you, and tell Jeff and everyone that I'm grateful for the hospitality here. I think it's, I think you can tell I love getting around and having a chance to visit with people. And if I sell a few books, that's fine. If I don't, that's fine too. I appreciate you taking the time to come out and be here today.
I have another question.
Yeah.
A spin off of the last question, is it a protocol or customary for someone running for office to go to the high schools and do like, not campaigning, but introduce yourself?
Oh, I think, I went to Athens High School in Athens, Ohio. If you can, here's what you have to do. First, you have to find the high school social studies teacher, or a high school English teacher, or somebody who's interested in politics. And if that teacher knows that you're willing to come and talk to young people, usually they can arrange for you to come.
So it would probably be good for someone to have on their staff, so to contact all the schools and stuff.
Well, I mean, these days, of course, again, there's a tendency on the part of, I'm sorry to say, on the part of the Republican Party, not all of the Republican Party, but kind of MAGA types, to be afraid of ideas, right? Afraid of books, afraid of teachers who might ask questions, or students who might ask unusual questions. So there may be sensitivities in some communities where that would be a problem, but I'll tell you, if you offer free donuts and a chance, we recruited a lot of girls from the Catholic junior high girls school, because my headquarters is right opposite St. Edward's High School, where all of the big guys were going, right? So they thought if they worked at our headquarters, they might meet some interesting guys from across the street. The guys weren't very involved, but boy, did those young women prove to be great campaigners. Yeah.
We have a rule in the library about programming: feed them and they will come.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Governor, in appreciation for your visit and for your time, we would like to present you with a mess, with a Williams County Public Library t-shirt.
I love it.
There you go, and thank you so much, sir. And ladies and gentlemen, Governor Dick Celeste.
Thank you. When I come back to campaign against the issues, I'll wear my Williams County Public Library.
There you go.
Nice warm autumn.
Governor Celeste's memoir is available for sale in the back. And the
if
governor,
anybody wants to buy the book, I'll sit there for a little bit and sign books for you if you're interested.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor.
Thanks, Denver.